Hey, everybody, it's Kathleen Gage with Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. And today I am very excited with my featured expert, Tyler Mayoras. He is the co-founder and CEO of Cool Beans, which is a plant-based vegan food company. And we're going to talk about that. I actually have my Cool Beans burrito right here. I've got 3 different types that I'm going to show you. But he actually comes from a 20-year career in private equity investing and consulting. So with that, Tyler, I'm going to let you take it away, introduce yourself, and then I have a boatload of questions. Or should I say a bean load of questions?
Bean load of questions, that's right. Well, thanks for having me on. I really love both of your podcasts. And I really appreciate you bringing me on. So my history, I went plant-based about 4 years ago. And as a private equity investor in the food and ag space, I was doing a lot of research. And I was at a conference in 2016. And at that conference, one of the things that people were talking about was animal agriculture and its effect on climate. And somebody came up with a statistic that 15% of all greenhouse gases were caused by animal agriculture. And I thought, there's just no way. So after that conference, went back to Chicago and decided I got to build this up myself. And I went to the USDA site, went to the EPA site, and started working and building the pieces and parts that all fit together. And ultimately, I came up with 16 to 19% of all greenhouse gases. So it was even higher. And I was floored. And that was the impetus to start me down the path. So I started with Meatless Monday, and then Meatless Monday and Friday, and vegan, et cetera, and just kind of went down this path. And by the beginning of 2017, I was fully vegan. And it was a great journey. And I additionally was starting to learn about the health benefits. And during that first year of being whole food plant-based, I lost 25 pounds and felt better. All my numbers got better. So it was actually very beneficial for me personally, as well as what I was trying to do for climate, because I've always been very interested in climate and the environment. And but one of the things that I noticed when I went down this road was, while you can buy all the products in the produce aisle and make it yourself, it's very difficult to find whole food plant-based prepared food in the grocery store. Mm-hmm. Most of it is, vegan fast food or junk food. And I love a lot of those products because they're bringing flexitarians over into the plant-based world, but I just couldn't eat that every day. And so ultimately I started making them myself. I would take big batches of food, I'd freeze it and started rolling it into wraps and tortillas to freeze it and take it to work for a week or whatnot. And that's where the idea came from. And then I started networking with several of my friends in the industry, and ultimately a good friend of mine from Mike Brennan, who went to business school with me and was one of the longtime employees and ultimately the COO of Peapod. He and I seed funded the company, and we partnered with Beyond Brands in New York to start developing the products, and they kind of take the lead on everything you need to do to start the company, if you will. And so they helped us develop the products with a food scientist, help with the branding, trademarking Cool Beans, and we were off and running. And we launched last May. We started going on shelves in grocery stores.
So you went live with all this during a pandemic.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk about a risk taker. Okay.
Yeah. So we originally were launching and we really did kind of launch in January, February. We were all ready. The products were made, et cetera. But then obviously the pandemic hit, and our first customer was actually going to be Peapod Chicago. But just before the pandemic, they ended up closing Peapod Chicago, unrelated, which turned out to be a very bad move because they would have done very well during the pandemic. But so that was supposed to be our first customer, and that was kind of shut down. Then we started to try to get on shelf, but once the pandemic hit, everybody put new resets on hold. So it took us really 3 months before we actually started getting on shelf in May.
So when the pandemic hit and Peapod, and for people who don't know what Peapod is, could you tell people what Peapod is?
Yeah, so Peapod was really, goes way back. I mean, they've been around for 20 years, and they were one of the first grocery delivery businesses in the U.S. And so what now people see as Good Eggs and Instacart and some of those things, Peapod was doing way back when Webvan was one of their competitors and long since went out of business. They were long ago acquired by Royal Ahold out of Amsterdam, which owns Stop and Shop and Giant and several different grocery chains. And so they were growing within Ahold as a business unit. And so they're basically a grocery delivery business.
So when the pandemic hit and you had an expectation that Peapod was going to carry your product and that folded, did you ever have a point where you thought, why did we even do this? Maybe we should just forget it, throw in the towel, or did you just say, okay, we're going to figure this thing out?
No, luckily we had put the product into a lot of people's mouths by that time, and there was really strong interest and demand for the product. So while retailers had stopped doing resets, we knew that there were several retailers interested, including Sprouts, which ultimately became our biggest customer, and we launched with them in September. But we had talked to many retailers, or our team had talked to many retailers at shows and whatnot, and so we knew that there was pretty strong demand. And the other nice thing is, and we don't have a direct number, but it's something like 90% of the people that try the product actually like it, like the taste. And that's very unusual in a consumer product because it's very polarizing. Taste is very polarizing. So we were pretty lucky in that we knew that people liked the product, and we knew there was nothing else out there on the market. So.
Right. Now, I know that you go into regions and you look for stores to carry you. You mentioned the Pacific Northwest, that you've been looking for opportunities here. Where can somebody like myself find Cool Beans?
Yeah. Well, the easiest way to look for it is there's a store locator on our website, eatcoolbeans.com. And our largest retailer is Sprouts. We're also in several regional retailers like Deerberg's in the St. Louis area, and we're going into Fairway in New York City and Hy-Vee in the Iowa areas, et cetera. We're going into market of choice in your area. And then we're in a lot of independent natural food stores. So people like Rainbow Blossom in Louisville, Kentucky, and Rainbow Acres in Los Angeles, and it's a mix of stores around the country.
So a lot of times when people see the success of a business like yours, because you're definitely on the fast track for some phenomenal success, your timing is perfect because more and more people are going plant-based. If not 100%, they're at least incorporating some of that into their diet. And they may look at you and say, well, you're so lucky, Tyler. You're so lucky because you just happen to be at the right place at the right time. Give us kind of a behind the scene look at what it's taken for you to really come to market. You talked about shows. A lot of people don't know that there's specific trade shows for certain industries. Share with us what you do to grow your business and raise awareness.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because a lot of people think they see companies and they think they're overnight successes. And a lot of times they've been building for 8 to 10 years. Right? So in our case, the idea was formed in late 2017. We actually formed the company in 2018. And I was not an employee because I had another job at the time, and as did Mike. So we were just board members and advisors to the company, but we were using Beyond Brands as the muscle to basically get everything developed. And we're developing the products, and that took about 18 months to develop the products, get a distribution partner, find a co-manufacturing partner, develop your branding, trademark, all those different things that you need to do. And then obviously we launch. Now, when you launch, you think, okay, now everybody's just going to carry you. Well, first of all, at the very best case, it's a 9-month lead time. And at the worst case, it's like a 2-year lead time to get into a grocery retailer, because they do their review, then they figure out which products they're going to bring in. Then they have a reset set in the future sometime. And all that takes a lot of time. So we're constantly calling on people that hopefully will be on shelf in a year from now, right? So it's a long process. Then getting on shelf is just the first part, because ultimately what you have to do is drive trial and repeat purchases. So we need to get the product in a lot of people's mouths to try it. And normally you would do demoing. Obviously, with the pandemic, you can't do demoing. So that's really—
You must be reading my notes because I'm writing down some questions I have about all that.
Yeah, that's really changed the game for all these young emerging brands. And unfortunately, one of the things that's happened, while COVID has been very good for grocery, in general, the big existing brands have done better than the small emerging brands because people don't want to spend a lot of time in the grocery store.
Right.
They want to get in and out with their list, and they don't do a lot of discovery like they used to do. They're obviously not trying samples and whatnot. So you have to really get your message out in as many ways as you can. So we're obviously doing a lot of social. We've built up a large newsletter that we send information to, and then we're doing something that's called a digital demo program, which is really interesting for some of your listeners. Call it from a company called Social Nature. There's now 2 or 3 that'll do this, but Social Nature, I think, is probably one of the biggest. They've got about 600,000, I guess I would call them subscribers or a cohort across the US. And these are people that have opted in to try products within their, whatever their food tribe is. So if they're paleo or they're vegan or whatever, and they want to try products that are new and that fit that niche, then they can do that. They receive a coupon, they sign up, they have to fill out, do some insight survey going in. And then if they're in the location of the area where the brand is trying to send people, they'll receive through the mail a coupon and some other information. And then they can try that, go into the store and grab it and try it. And so we're trying to do that because, again, we need to get as many people to try the product, because once they do, we know that a large percentage of them are going to like it.
Absolutely. And I want to remind people that this is Kathleen Gage with Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm talking with Tyler Mayoras of Cool Beans, and the website where you can get more information is Eat Cool Beans. I was thinking about that. That's a nice subliminal command. Eat cool beans.
Yeah,
and I encourage you, eat cool beans. I've got Moroccan gold, and in here we've got sweet potato, red kidney beans, golden Malay, tomato, Moroccan seasoning. Then we've got spicy chipotle, and this has got black-eyed peas, corn, brown rice, chipotle seasoning, poblano chili peppers. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, poblano,
okay. Yeah. So if you like it a little spicier. And then we've got tikka masala and blonde chickpeas, jasmine rice, rice cauliflower, green peas, tikka masala seasoning. So wide variety, very tasty. And in your company,
just when you go back to that packaging, just one for a second, that was very deliberate when we developed the company, because we knew that the product was going to be very different than everything else on the market. We didn't want— most wraps are like a stew inside. So it's kind of like a sauce mush that's been rolled up. And we didn't want anything like that. We wanted it to just spill out whole food ingredients, because that's what we're trying to be, whole food, plant-based. And so when you cut it open, it's beans, right, some kind of a whole grain, and vegetables actually spill out. And all the flavor comes from spices. So we don't have any sauce. We don't have a
okay.
And so we were very deliberate, and we wanted the big picture on the front, and we wanted to list the ingredients, because to us, the ingredients are the hero.
I'll show that to people again. I'm going to put that right up to the camera.
Or the first 4 ingredients, and then whatever the seasoning blend
Excellent.
is listed
Excellent.
right on the front.
So how many people are in your company?
So there's about 5 of us that work on it. A couple are full-time, and then several are part-time folks that we've kind of worked with through Beyond Brands. So,
and where do you see the sustainability industry going? Because I know that, more and more as people realize how detrimental factory farming is, animal agricultural is, and the rainforests are being stripped away at a horrendous rate. There's a new movie out called Seaspiracy that talks about what's happening to the oceans. I mean, this is the real deal of what we're doing to destroy the earth, and it can be reversed, but people have to jump on board. So where do you see things going, not only from a personal perspective in your life, but globally and then economically for people who are interested in possibly starting a business?
Yeah, well, so what's so good about the plant-based diet is that it takes out that greenhouse gas issue that's associated with animal agriculture. And the reason the number's so high isn't just the animals themselves, although we've got billions of animals on the planet. The problem is 70% of our farmland is used to feed those animals. We don't even feed, it doesn't feed humans, it feeds animals. So it's hugely wasteful. And all along that chain, whether it's the nitrogen you're putting into the soil, or it's growing the crops, or it's moving those crops, all those have greenhouse gases associated with it. And that's how you pile up this huge number that ends up being 16 to 19% of all greenhouse gases. In addition to that, the nitrogen in particular has a big runoff issue. So they create liquid nitrogen out of the air basically by heating it up to a very high temperature using fossil fuels. So very bad system overall. And ultimately then something like 40% of it runs off into our water system. And so we're contaminating our water with that. And at the same time that we're creating a huge amount of greenhouse gases. So that's why plant-based is so good. And what's really has me optimistic is the percentage of plant-based eaters by population groups. So if you looked at the total population, historically, it's always been around 1% that identify as vegan. In the last 4 years, that's exploded up to about 3%, which is good, not great, but it's a lot better. If you looked at the millennials, it's more like 6%. And if you look at Generation Z, it's over 10%. And so the trend is our friend in seeing that, Generation Z, more than, I got to hand it to them, what Greta's done. And that generation is almost single-handedly going to change the world from a climate perspective, and which is great. And they're driving this. And so I never could in the past see a future where maybe 30% of people would eat plant-based, but I now can see that because of what's happening in Generation Z.
Well, and it's kind of the domino effect, because a few weeks ago we had some family in and I did all the cooking and it was all plant-based except the one meal where they decided to do ribs on the barbecue. And I said, I don't even want to see it. And, I have to respect where they're coming from and they respect where I'm coming from. But I said, I'll do the cooking except for that. And everybody was shocked. They were like, wow, this is amazing. And most of it was my nephew and his wife, and they're in their 30s. And they were both like, you know what, you're healthier than we are. You're more energetic than we are. You're more than double our age. It's like something's going on here. And I said, it's called plant-based eating, try it. So I gave her some books to read and said, just check it out and get informed. So
yeah, I saw on your website, you said you're in your upper 60s, and I'm shocked by that.
Well, I'm going to be 67 in a couple of months. So thank you. Yeah. I give a lot of credit.
Triathlons, is it, or marathons?
No. I did one sprint triathlon, and I've done a couple of full marathons, and I always hold the distinction of being the last person in. I mean, I hold that claim to fame, and I hold it with pride. But I finish, and but I really enjoy 5 and 10Ks. But on any given day, I'll do 2, 3, 4 miles just to get a good run in. And even if it's 35 degrees, I'm still going to get my run in. But curious, and again, I want to remind people, this is Kathleen Gage with Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. And I am talking with Tyler Mayoras, and he is with Cool Beans. And the website is Eat Cool Beans. You'll be glad you did. Now, if somebody were thinking of starting a business within the plant-based arena, they've got an idea for whether it be a food type, whether it be a drink, whether it be clothing, whatever it may be, they're ready to start a business. What's your advice to them? Where should they start?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of open area still, if you will. So certainly there's been plant-based analogs in burgers and some of the seafoods and things like that. Although I just heard about the first one I've heard in shrimp, which would be interesting, creating analogs in the shrimp area. I would look at really big food groups that are not necessarily healthy and try to create alternatives. That's certainly an easy way to go. for us, I think that there's a lot of open space in the plant-based area, the whole food plant-based area where we play. Um, beans are just so good for you, and they're great for the environment because they actually put nitrogen back in the soil. So they're like carbon negative, which is great. But from our perspective, the fiber that they have is critical in your gut for gut bacteria, which controls your immunity, which controls your mental health, and what you crave and what to eat. So beans and vegetables in general have a lot of fiber, and so those are really important across. I think that's the one thing that we're as a population really deficient in. Most people are focused on this whole idea of protein, but really what we're deficient in is fiber. Almost everybody is deficient in fiber, and you need a diversity of fiber to supply your gut bacteria and basically improve your overall health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, are members of your family plant-based?
So interestingly, when I started this journey, nobody was. And they thought I was a crazy quack, and I was cooking basically for myself. And after I lost 25 pounds and was doing better, my wife started slowly converting, and she's not plant-based, but I would say that she's 85 to 90% plant-based. Then one of my daughters was having all kinds of stomach issues, and I kind of went through it with her and ultimately convinced her to give up dairy. And she's been dairy-free for a long time and doing great. And that has been a life changer for her. And then my other daughter tried to do plant-based for a while. It was a little bit difficult, but I would say she doesn't eat meat or any kind of meat. She does some cheese. But for the most part, they've all dramatically cut back as a result. And that one daughter is really heavily focused on environment issues. And so it's very difficult to be an environmentalist and not be plant-based because it's so hypocritical.
Well, it's interesting because not only an environmentalist, but somebody within the pet space, because I actually used to do a lot of work pre-pandemic in the pet space. And I remember the first conference I went to, I assumed there would be no meat served, and they served London broil, I think it was, or filet, chicken, fish. They had all sorts of choices for people. And I was still eating meat at that time, and so it never really fazed me. But when I finally went plant-based and then started identifying as a vegan, I looked at that and I thought, there's kind of a disconnect there. Here we're doing such good things for the animals, and yet we're consuming them. And I was 6 months into being plant-based before it really clicked of like, wow, for all those years, what a hypocrite. And, and I don't pass judgment on people because it took me until I was 64 to finally get it and to really say, that's it. I will never consume meat again. And I've had people say, how can you be so sure? And it's like, oh, I'm sure. Because the more we learn, the less able we would be able to put anything like that on our fork.
So that's why it's so good that it's now a three-legged stool where the health is better, the climate is better, and the animals, because it's hard to get people. And I think the reason it was 1% for so long is because the animal argument, we've got such a long-term cloud around us about the animal side of it and how we bifurcate what a pet is versus an animal that we eat, that's not going to bring people to this movement.
Right.
But climate and health will bring them. And then once you get in, you're like, oh my God, my eyes are open now. It's like lifting the veil.
Absolutely. I agree 100% because I came for health. I was dealing with inflammation. When I ran, I would get leg cramps. I had gout. I mean, a number of different things. And as soon as I gave up dairy and all animal-based products, all of that disappeared. I mean, I was actually talking with somebody just yesterday about it, that I haven't had a flare-up of gout since going plant-based. The planta phaeacia, I think I never can pronounce that, but I had major problems with that. No problem at all. My inflammation is gone, which, really leads into all the health aspects, which is heart disease, stroke, dementia.
gut. Your gut's a lot stronger now.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so it's sending good, healthy antibodies down to the rest of your body as a result of being in a good, strong place.
Absolutely. So, in closing, what are your final thoughts for people, and what can you do to encourage people to at least give? Well, first of all, I want them to give Cool Beans a try. Go to Eat Cool Beans. That's eatcoolbeans.com. We'll put that in the show notes. But what would you do to encourage people to at least give this way of life a try?
Yeah, I try not to jump on the soapbox too much because I think what's great is there's a lot of people that are doing a flexitarian move. Mm-hmm. I think that's moving people. Not even all of our founders are 100% plant-based. Obviously, I am, and a couple of the others are. But as I think if you can try to give up meat 1 day a week or 2 days a week, give up meat and dairy, that will be much better for your health, and you'll notice a difference. And then that slowly will get you along the way. The other thing that you realize when you do that is that, holy cow, I'm eating a lot more flavor than I used to. I used to think that flavor was, salt, sugar, and fat. But man, when you go plant-based and you start using all these spices, it just really opens a whole new window of taste. And I think people will discover that if they do it 1 or 2 days a week.
Absolutely. And there's a great book called Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss, and I highly recommend it. He has a new one coming out. I think it's called Addicted, and it's all about how the food manufacturers actually have chemists that get that exact percentage of whatever it is to get us hooked on foods that are unhealthy. So I just want to say, Tyler, thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts with us, and best of luck with your business. And again, I encourage people go to eatcoolbeans.com. That's eatcoolbeans.com. And Tyler, thank you so much for what you're doing and all you're sharing.
Very fun. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. This is Kathleen Gage with Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show, wishing you a very healthy, vibrant life. Have a great day.
Thank you for your commitment to an ethical life through plant-based food choices. The kind of choices that are kind to your body, the environment, and most of all, animals. Be sure to leave a review and rating of the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show.